Today on Yeti at Large, a long overdue and awaited installment of What's in Your Kitchen, featuring the Sunbeam, Monsieur Crepe.
This is Yeti at Large, a channel focused on making the most out of what you got, no matter where you're at. Now that you're here, let's go. Well, to make crepes, we got to make crepe batter. Now, I'll show you the recipe twice here in a second, and there's nothing special about the recipe. Any crepe recipe will work. It's how you mix the batter and how you cook them. If you've watched our videos for any length of time, you'll know we use our even arm balance scale to scale out our ingredients because we go by weight. So take a look at this recipe. I'll show it again in a few seconds, but you'll see that the mix is the important thing, and avoiding lumps. And yes, that's a very cranky Siamese in the background. Avoiding lumps in the batter is all dependent on how you mix the batter. So we're going to start by scaling out our eggs. I like to put them in a mason jar because, as you can see, I'm going to have some room in the top of the jar. So I'll shake them in the jar to mix them up real good. I always use unsalted butter when I'm baking so I can control my salt amount. Remember, when you're baking, you're not adding salt to taste necessarily, but follow the recipe because it's important to have the right amount of salt. There's the right amount of butter. We'll put that someplace warm where it'll melt but won't be hot. You'll see why in a minute. Couldn't find my parchment paper, so I'm using some foil to scale out my flour, my sugar, and my salt. You'll notice I leave them in separate piles so that if I add too much, I can take the scoop and take a little bit out. But that amount is just right. C&H pure cane sugar. It's the only sugar I use. Again, you'll see how we're scaling the recipe here, and there's steps in between each batch of ingredients. This makes quite a bit of batter, but you can easily halve it or quarter it if you just want to make a couple of crepes at home and have some fun. Listening to cool jazz in the background because it makes me contemplative when I'm scaling out ingredients, and I like that. So we're going to add a little bit of salt here off in the corner. We're just using a basic Morton iodized salt, nothing special. I believe this recipe calls for a ½ ounce. I bumped the scale there, so that wasn't it. If you have questions about the even arm balance scale, go to some of our previous videos. So we're going to triple sift our dry ingredients, partially because it'll help mix them, mostly because it gets foreign objects that might be in them out of it, and it adds a ton of static, which is going to make it easy to mix. So we'll break it through the sifter. Here's our eggs in the mason jar that we mixed up real hard, and I'll run them through the strainer as well for foreign objects and shell and whatnot. You'll see they fall through pretty good after they've been mixed in the jar a little bit. And now with our dry ingredients and our egg, we're going to start to mix with a little whisk, starting in the middle and grabbing a little bit at a time. And you're going to see we get a real tough batter that goes out to a nice ribbon. Here's where that melted butter will come in, melted but not hot. Scrape down your sides, keep your handles real clean, keep your workstation clean. Oh, green milk? What in the world? Why do we have green milk? Well, let me show you. Because not only are we using these crepes for a delicious dessert, but we're making beef Wellington for Christmas, and I need parsley crepes for a traditional recipe. I take the time to pick all the stems out of the parsley. The stems are bitter. The leaves have the flavor and the color. I get a little bit of boiling water on the stove while I'm cleaning my parsley, and I'm going to blanch it here to lock in that color, to cook the parsley, and to make it more nice to blend, make it more nice. Learned to talk recently. So I put my parsley in the boiling water, and I'll let it sit for about 2 minutes off the stove with the lid on, kind of stir it around in there. And once it's blanched but not turned gray and ugly, I'll strain it and we'll set it aside. And now we got this, looks like spinach almost, doesn't it? But you don't want spinach for those crepes. You want the parsley to be traditional. I'm going to put it in the blender with a portion of milk for the crepe recipe, and we're going to blend it down so that we get a good green milk. Notice those pumpkin pies there for Thanksgiving. I'll strain it till I get a lot of the solids out of there, and then I'll throw those solids back in the blender, blend again, and go all the way through it. This got set aside in the freezer for a little while. Again, I'm making this at Thanksgiving. I needed the parsley for the turkey. And we'll use it now that we're making our crepe batter a couple weeks later. There's the milk for the other half for the sweet crepes. We're going to divide this batter in half by weight. We're going to make half green and half regular. So, méthode de liaison. Basically the liaison method. If you have a really thick item and you have a really thin item, start with a small amount of the thin and add it gently until you get it completely incorporated. Here we are mixing the green. It's so disgusting to look at, I figured we'd all enjoy it. That's where the title Creepy Crepes came from, because it's kind of like a Halloween thing. This is a little different method where I have my best friend helping me mix the batter, and she'll drizzle in a little bit at a time and I'll keep incorporating for a perfectly smooth batter. The key is the batter must rest for 24 hours.
Now, being Gen X and a kid of the 70s, we saw all kinds of cooking gadgets come through our parents' houses. There was a whole fondue wave that took over, and I bet you everybody's got one of those hiding in their pantry in the kitchen. Well, at my mom's house, I found the Sunbeam Monsieur Crepe. This is a crepe maker, and they were the rage in the 70s. We're going to make some crepes today, not only for dessert, but we're also going to make them for our beef Wellington for Christmas.
So, here comes the Snobby Chef product review. This is a heating element with an upside down Teflon skillet. It's kind of gimmicky, but I think it's a whole lot of fun and I'm having a ball. Problematic though, is the way you dip it in the batter leaves these huge holes with air pockets, and for a dessert crepe that's not that big of a deal, but for the crepes for the Wellington they can't have any holes because I'm using them to keep in the juices. So here we have a crepe, and you can see I had to kind of triple coat it and fill in the holes. It cooks quickly. These crepes are very delicious with a little vanilla and orange peel in them. Stay tuned to the end. You'll see us eating some custard and blueberry Grand Marnier crepes, and I'm folding them up here to kind of test them and see how they taste. So as a product maker, this thing is a whole lot of fun, slow and tedious. In the commercial kitchens, especially at the Wigwam, we serve thousands of crepes, and I would have 12 pans in a station going making crepes for banquets and dining room service. So for me to sit here and wait for one crepe at a time is maddening, and I have no control over how the product comes out. Let's switch to a more traditional method, and let me show you how I'm going to make those parsley crepes for the Wellington. And it doesn't have to be the parsley. If you want to make crepes at home and you have a nice Teflon skillet, you don't need Monsieur Crepe. So here we are on a traditional method with a 12-inch saute pan, just a tiny amount of pan release to get started. I've got a 2 1/4 ounce ladle here, and I put a generous ladle because I need a large industrial crepe to work in a mechanical fashion inside my beef Wellington. The pan's at a good temperature, not too hot, not too cold, but I'll keep swirling this edge and going up the side of the pan, staying off those rivets where the handle is, to get the even size of a crepe with no puddles or thick spots and get the largest crepe possible. You can see it takes a few seconds, and the drips have kind of dried up enough that that's a crepe that I can let cook. I got a rubber spatula and I'm flipping them by hand, not trying to flip them all fancy because they're too big for that. Notice it looks more like it's drying than cooking. There's a little tan in the middle, but I made 8 of these large crepes for beef Wellington. Stay tuned for that video coming up around Christmas.
I'm ready.
Le Monsieur Crepe from the 70s. Crepe recipe from the 1800s.
I would have my career.
And what do we think? Oh,
tells me you would have figured it out.
that's where it's at.
Besides, it's a little weird having my master sergeant carrying my tab. I'll get us somewhere. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Richard.
I know I'm supposed to be narrating and talking to the camera, but I'm eating crepes and making crepes. Cheers to you, Yeti at large.